He's currently a co-founder of PPTproductivity.com, making working in PowerPoint less painful, and is supported by MAP as an entrepreneur in residence. He's an alumnus of the University of Melbourne and has attended the Graduate Studies program at Singularity University at NASA AMA's Research Centre in Silicon Valley. So I'd like to pass on to Zezan.
Thanks all for coming, and thanks for the introduction, Alex. I just wanted to, before I start, give a bit of an overview of where all this is coming from. So, as Alex mentioned, I attended a place called Singularity University last year, which is a bit of a startup academy based in Silicon Valley around startups to do with high technology. And it really kind of changed the way I think about the future. It changed the way I think about technology, and it changed the way I think about how startups can interact with technology. So I just want to share some of the new thinking that I've got here in this presentation today. So I call it Writing Global Tech Trends. So the first question is, like, why do you want to care about tech trends? Why should, as entrepreneurs, we care about tech trends? And the first really obvious reason, it's kind of the blunt reason, is survival, right? And to demonstrate this, I kind of want to tell a story. So, you know, in 1806, there was this guy named Frederick Tudor, the ice king of Boston, not Walter White ice, but ice blocks. And everyone thought he was really eccentric and crazy because he was an entrepreneur and he started exporting ice. So in the winter, he would cut ice from like the surfaces of lakes and rivers and stuff. And if you gather enough ice and you store it in an ice house, because it has low surface area to volume ratio, it actually doesn't melt in the summer, and you can actually distribute ice and keep things cool in the summer. So back in 1806, this was a huge innovation. And he exported ice and he made a lot of money. He unlocked trade for, you know, keeping meat and produce fresh. Dramatically grew the fishing industry because you can now sell fish more than a day old. And so he was, you know, pretty influential, and everyone thought, oh wow, this is a great thing. And then the market matured and everyone moved in, and everyone was thinking, okay, how do I beat this guy at storing and transporting ice around, right? So all this innovation was like, I can use a different saw, or I can like be more efficient with my supply chain and get the wagon ready for the ice to be loaded up. And so everyone was innovating about, like, how do I get ice to the consumer faster? How do I do this better? And then along comes a new technology, boom, right? Refrigerators come around, and all these ice companies get wiped out because I think what they failed to notice was, you know, they were all thinking, I'm competing with other ice companies, and, you know, there's this kind of startup that's doing some technology to do with pumping gas around in weird ways, and that's got nothing to do with me. What they failed to notice, I think, is that their market was not in how, you know, their market was not ice. Their market was people wanting chilled services, right? So they kind of mistimed their market. They didn't notice that another technology was coming around that was actually quite related to what they do, and it kind of wiped them out, or at least the ones that didn't invest in the new technology. So that's kind of the number one reason you want to care about tech trends. You don't want to get blindsided and realize that what you're selling is no longer relevant. But that's pretty negative. So I think the second reason you really want to care about tech trends is because they present huge opportunities, right? You want to be the person on that side of the tech equation. You want to be on the refrigerator side, not on the ice block side. So the obvious path to kind of take advantage of that is you're actually building new technology. And that means that, you know, you have to somehow believe you're better at finding and retaining technical talent, or that you are a skilled scientist and you have technical talent, and you know how to manage that technical risk better than everyone else. You also need to kind of have a big capital base because R&D is typically quite expensive and you need to experiment a lot. And then even at the end of all this, you know, you might have gotten your product market fit wrong, and your technology is actually not really valued by the consumer. So it's quite risky to kind of take this more obvious path of actually building technology. So, you know, obviously myself, I don't have a technical background. So when I started thinking about technology, I thought about it in a different way. I thought about it as in an alternative path. How do you get ready? If you think about technology, if you have a strong belief that a technology is coming around, what are the ways that you can get ready to take advantage of that great opportunity? And so, you know, I think of two different ways to do that. The first is to kind of either build shovels, and the second is to entrench. So building shovels is really about building some kind of infrastructure or distribution channels or something essentially that this new paradigm is going to value. And this comes from the analogy of how in the gold rush, you know, some individual miners that strike gold actually make a lot of money, but the people that made good, consistent money were selling shovels to the miners, right? So this is kind of the idea that you can build something peripheral to the technology being built that's still quite useful. And then the second idea is to, I call it entrench, but essentially it's about betting big on this technology, having a reasonable belief that it's going to come around, and therefore you're going to invest into something that people don't think is valuable right now, but will become valuable when the technology comes around or becomes more valuable. So you're either investing in some kind of network advantage and trying to build a network first before anyone else. You're investing deeply into your brand or some kind of capability that's going to be needed in this future paradigm. And I'll give a quick example of what this means in practice. It's a company, a case study company called GetAround. Has anyone heard of GetAround, by the way? One, great. What does GetAround do? Yep.
We pretty much said we needed a car for today.
Yep.
And people, it's not their own car. It is them being registered to get around and you can hire it for the day and you return it with a full tank of petrol in your phone. So.
Exactly, exactly. So for those that didn't hear it, it's essentially a peer-to-peer car marketplace where people can list their cars and other people can kind of say, I want that car for the day. And so GetAround is really interesting to me because it was founded out of Singularity University in 2009, and I've actually talked to some of the advisors to the founders and stuff about their plan. They've raised 20 million in funding. They're going pretty well at the moment. But the really interesting part about this is I think they're doing this entrenched strategy where what they're doing is they're investing into a network. It's a network business, right? You know, you want to be the first to be the brand name that says all the cars list here and you can get any car you want here. But they invest into a network before it's kind of really that mature, right? Because if you think about car sharing a couple of years ago, how do you do it? You have to like go to somebody's place, pick up the keys from them, then walk to the car. And then once you walk to the car, then you're going to drive the car around, but you have to return it, as you said, with a full tank of petrol to the same place, which is like kind of a bit of a hassle, right? Sometimes I just want to get my car because I want to get moving quickly. So, you know, you're going to have not many people using this platform at first. But then tech changes, right? Tech matures. They didn't invent the fact that miniaturization was making chips cheaper and stuff, but they did ride that wave where suddenly, you know, a couple of years ago, they implemented the ability to sell this small black box that was essentially receiving an SMS signal and then digitally unlocking the car. So they removed this need to exchange the keys. And so this made the proposition of car sharing much more attractive, right? So now I can just walk up to a car or walk up to a neighborhood, say, what are the get-around cars in this area, press the button, and the car actually unlocks, and off we go. So, you know, that made the network more effective, right? And so they were here first, and as this, they've kind of entrenched their position. Now, what gets really exciting for me is what they're actually entrenching for, I believe, is a self-driving car paradigm. So if you believe that self-driving cars are going to happen and that you're going to have the ability to send a digital signal to a car and it can drive itself around, you get past that last problem of, in this new paradigm, if you're like owning a car and you're asleep at 3 a.m., why wouldn't you say, yeah, okay, if someone wants the car, you know, you can go out there and I can earn some money without doing anything, right? So if you can do the digital key exchange and you can do the car exchange where it'll take, you know, go out to its own renter, do its job and come back to you, why wouldn't you do that? So it's kind of preparing for this new paradigm, and the network it's built, you know, by the time everyone else realizes, oh, peer-to-peer car carrying is really cool for self-driving cars, they've been around for years, right? They've developed capabilities, they've developed brand, they've developed capabilities in terms of like insurance, and they know how to verify drivers, they know how to deal with complaints, all these kind of things. So did they invent, you know, self-driving car technology? No. Did they invent miniaturization of chips and stuff like that? Not really, right? But they ride these tech trends, and because they entrenched in the right place and they built some kind of network advantage, they've been able to take advantage of the tech trend. So that's what I mean by entrenchment. So, you know, when we talk about tech trends, I tend to think about a couple of questions to do with them because you know, it's important to not think that every tech trend is going to happen and stuff like that. So the first thing is actually about timing, right? How likely is this to really happen? What's a good prospective timeline for the technology to be built out? I was actually checking to George, who's another MAP fellow, about this just before. it's hard to know. I mean, you have to kind of try and follow the tech press, and you try and, I mean, talk to as many technical people as you can about whether tech is actually going to happen or whether it's just a pipe dream that you saw in some extreme tech news. But I think a good proxy for this is you can take a good bet that if Google's working on it, it's probably going to pan out quite well, right? So, you know, you try and back larger players that are kind of committing to this kind of technology. Also, you know, on timing, you actually sometimes want to think about, okay, technology's there, but maybe the consumer part is there. Because there's a lot of really cool technology. You're going to see it in tech press if you follow it a lot, that like someone's invented a way to 3D print organs, right? But it's actually, they've invented a way to 3D print organs in a prototype lab, and it's not consumer ready yet, right? So that's the other aspect. Don't be fooled to say, okay, just because it's here, it's going to happen. You need to think both about when it's going to be technically feasible, but also when about it's going to be commercially feasible and therefore available to you to use. The second kind of questions is you want to understand the disruption that this tech is doing and whether it's a real disruption. So the way I do this is I think about what is the real market, and is this tech serving the real market better? And what I mean by real market is how close to the kind of real consumer desire can you get? So this is back to the ice and refrigeration problem, right? What people wanted chilled technology. They didn't want ice, right? So by getting closer to giving the consumer what they want in a cheaper way, you can totally, you know, ice is essentially just a how. It's not a what they actually want. So if you have to understand whether this technology is going to kind of move further closer to the innate consumer desire and deliver it cheaper or better than before. And then, so now if you think timing's pretty, you know, it's going to work, and actually when this happens, it's going to be quite disruptive, then the question is to take advantage of it. How do you understand the new paradigm, right? How do you, what happens in this new paradigm? Like how does the world actually work, right? Essentially, what is the value chain? So which parts are new and which parts are still transplanted from the old system? So in terms of self-driving cars, you're going to think, okay, what's going to be transplanted? I'm pretty sure being in the tire business is still a pretty good idea in self-driving cars. That didn't really change. That gets transplanted over. What doesn't get transplanted over is labor for drivers, right? So I wouldn't want to be running a, you know, chauffeur labor service at this time, right? Because of that. So you want to think about what are the new kind of, how does the new world work, and then try and find a market in there that you think is going to grow because of this new technology. All of this is kind of hard. I think day to day, it's just crazy to think about like some of this extreme tech stuff. And it's really hard. So I think what you have to do sometimes is suspend reality and actually just kind of think, okay, well, what if, and do a bit of dreaming. And then that's when you kind of really appreciate the future possibilities. So I suggest if you were trying to think about how do tech trends apply to my startup, you want to kind of just suspend, like, I don't need to pay bills or anything like that, let's just dream. And then you come back down to earth and you see if the ideas that you kind of made while dreaming actually stack up to reality. So the place where I was allowed to dream was at Singularity University, which was like this 3 months that I spent in Silicon Valley where I was pretty much focused on thinking about these kind of issues. So that's what I want to talk about in the next stage of this presentation. I just want to talk about what is Singularity University. Formerly, it was essentially founded by a bunch of corporate sponsors of like tech firms, Genentech and biotech, Nokia and Cisco Communications, Google, you know, in terms of computing and technology in general, Autodesk Design, and entrepreneurial organizations like the Kaufman Foundation and venture capital firm. And then it's located on a NASA campus. But that doesn't really tell you what it is. So I think this is a more entertaining way of thinking about it. It's essentially like one part TED-style lectures. So, you know, we would sit in this classroom for half the day and have all these world-renowned speakers come in and talk about cool tech trends or world problems. It's kind of one part hackathon. So the second half of the course, you're actually trying to focus on a problem and try and build a prototype solution to it or think about ideas that would work. It's one of my classmates who actually invented a way to, you can use a DVD and you can use the spinning in the DVD to like spin blood. So, you know, he designed this essentially in 4 weeks. It was really cool. And then the last part is like, it's kind of part conference, right? There's a lot of networking, a lot of talking to really amazing people that I call my friends now, like all the world over. So fantastic experience in that regard. Another way to think of it is if you take like really cool tech, like Google Glass, Oculus Rift, you take all this really cool tech, you cram it in with this deep humanitarian idea that, you know, there are big problems in the world and technology can kind of help with this. That's Hans Rosling. Who knows who Hans Rosling is? Yep, Charlie doesn't. Yeah, so Hans Rosling is this great kind of speaker about, he understands a lot of the world's problems and how development works and stuff. So, you've got great speakers there. You mix in, you put it in Silicon Valley and you mix in all this optimism about, Silicon Valley Kool-Aid, we can do everything, we're the center of the earth, we're awesome. And then you kind of actually wrap it up in a whole bunch of Californian hippiness of like, this is all of us outside, and it was some kind of vulnerability kind of exercise. We were all standing and like telling each other how much we love each other and hugging each other. It's cool. But you mix all these things together and you get this really cool Singularity University experience where you can come here and just really think about, the world's got some problem, but there's cool technology to solve it, and we can actually do this, right? Another way to think about it is who are the founders. So there's kind of two founders. One is the brain is Ray Kurzweil. He's essentially this famous inventor. He was pretty active a couple of decades ago, but he was the first to invent, was the primary inventor of the first CCD flatbed scanner, omnifont optical character recognition, text-to-speech reading, a lot of essentially like early AI type technology. And then he's also a futurist in terms of he's written a couple of books, the most famous of which is probably The Singularity is Near. It's this book where he describes technology's progression and he makes predictions about the future, about how computers are going to get faster and faster, better and better. We're going to put them in our brains and design better computers and become these superhuman cyborg god kind of things. Sounds kind of weird, but the funny thing is he's got this weird way of being pretty right? So like 89 out of his last 108 predictions are correct. The rest of them are like mostly correct or like 1 or 2 years off. For example, like this was before anyone heard of like chess AI or anything like that. He predicted, I'm pretty sure computers and AI is going to get better, good enough to beat the best human chess player by the year 2000. And then what happens? In 97, Deep Blue beats Garry Kasparov and the world's like, wow. So now he's actually working at Google. He's currently one of the directors of engineering there, and he's got a team working on using AI and kind of reversing out how the brain works to build out their natural language understanding. So the ability for Google to understand words not just as like a bunch of text, but what the words actually mean. So this kind of Siri-like technology that Google's got, Google Now. So he's like super smart, he's like the brains of it. And then the other founder was this guy who's, I think, of like the heart, right? This guy's Peter Diamandis, and Peter's probably the happiest and most energetic and just positive guy I've ever seen. He's like this huge kind of space geek. He has a Master of Engineering, aerospace engineering from MIT, he's an MD from Harvard, and then he founded all these companies to do with space because he loves space, but he's not very tall, so he probably wouldn't have been able to get into being an astronaut. And so he's like, okay, well, I'll make companies that will get me to space instead. So he founded the X Prize Foundation, which gave out a $10 million prize for the first private company to reach suborbital space. And the winner of that essentially was bought by Branson to become Virgin Galactic now. He's founded a company called Zero G, which essentially it takes a plane up and does parabolic flight. At the top of a parabola, if you're inside the plane, it feels essentially like you're weightless, which is really cool. So there's like this picture where he's like linking hands with Elon Musk, and I think it's the chairman of Fox, and I don't know who the rest of the guys are, but there's some famous guys doing like weightless flight. He's taken like Stephen Hawking up like heaps of times, and Stephen Hawking gets to the ground and he's like, take me again. Yeah, he gets really excited. He wrote a book, Abundance. If you haven't read it, I suggest you read it to get this like shot of optimism about the future. And then some of the more crazy stuff he's founded is like Planetary Resources, which closed like $1 million Kickstarter for a public telescope. But Planetary Resources is essentially built as a company to figure out how do we go to asteroids and mine them. Really crazy. And then actually, only like a few weeks ago, he launched Human Longevity with this famous biotechnologist, Craig Venter. And he's trying to aim there to make 100 the new 60, which would be great. I would love to have another 40 years. So these two guys kind of really set the culture of Singularity University, which is like, there's a lot of cool tech, be really excited about it, and try and do really cool things with it. The main idea that drives all the thinking behind Singularity University is this idea of exponential growth. And essentially, it's this idea that technology's growth is exponential. As your technology improves, it allows you to design and build the next stage of technology better and faster. And so it came from this kind of observation of Moore's law, which is this observation that the price performance in computing doubles every 18 to 24 months in a whole bunch of metrics, like calculations per second for $100 worth of tech, for example. And so you see these similar trends in other fields like genome sequencing costs and stuff like that. And essentially, it's a really powerful idea if you suddenly subscribe to the fact that tech is exponential. As a quick example, 30 linear steps means 30 steps, right? 30 exponential steps takes you to 2, 4, 8. It takes you to 1 trillion, right? So it gets fast really quickly. The kind of analogy, the reason I say that is, say you're like looking for a marker at 10, right? And if you expect technology to progress linearly, you're going to be like 1. Okay, I got 9 more kind of steps, right? 8 or 2, I got 8 more steps, 3, et cetera, et cetera. You're expecting it to be slow. But if they're exponential steps, you'll go, okay, 1, I got 9 more steps, 2, 8 more steps. Wait, 4, 8, boom, and 16, right? So within 3 steps, it's kind of overtaken you. And it's this idea essentially that if you think tech is exponential, the idea is it's probably going to sneak up on you, right? And whenever you kind of get skeptical about technology, try to think, well, maybe the technology is going to be exponential. Maybe I'm just looking at the linear part of it, and then boom, it's going to explode. I just want to give you a flavor of the kind of people that you meet there, because the kind of people also, try to hang around people that can help you dream, right, about this kind of technology stuff. One of my favorite examples of one of my fellow students was this guy. He's Finnish-born, UK-based, got a PhD in string theory mathematics, now an award-winning sci-fi writer. That's one of his books. And then, just started a biotech firm, as you do, right? And it's very diverse. Like, he's kind of more science side. And then there's this guy, Sony, Greek-born, Romanian-based business magnate. I was Googling his name to get a picture, and then I just figured out he's actually on the cover of like Forbes Romania, and he's like some centimillionaire. So really crazy kind of students, right? And that's just the students. Then you've got faculty. Brad Templeton, he was chairman of the Electronic Frontier Foundation. They've got a lot of press lately around the Snowden leaks and stuff. But they try to essentially protect internet freedom. So he was the chairman for 10 years, only stepped down a couple of years ago, and now kind of works with Google on robocars. Dan Barry, who is a 3-time astronaut, he's been to space 3 times, but he's got this great story because he was rejected 17 times before he was finally accepted by NASA. Like, every year he would write, and they would write back like, no, you're not good enough. And he just kept writing in until he made it. So, some of the faculty are amazing. And then the speakers, also amazing. So, there's a picture there, Steve Jurvetson, who's the J in DFJ, the legendary venture capital company that's invested into SpaceX and Tesla and D-Wave. Mark Andreessen, who's one half of Andreessen Horowitz and founded Netscape. And I talked about Hazen Rosling just before. These are just some of the names, but really, really top caliber speakers there. So that was kind of like where I was able to really, dream about all these cool new technologies and what they might mean for the world. The other thing that I want to talk about is like, what are the tech trends that I think are now quite interesting, and you might want to think about in terms of thinking about whether you can find a way to build shovels or entrench to deal with these. And there's 7 kind of fields here, but I've left a question mark because really, it's not a prescriptive list, right? Any technology is quite interesting as long as you think about timing, you think about whether it's really disruptive, you think about what you can do afterwards. So the first one is robotic cars. I think this is, if I had to be like talking about one trend, the most bullish one I would be about is robocars. I think it's a reality. It's going to happen. The conceptual tech is already here. You've got robocars driving around California. They've driven like X miles, no accidents that have been caused by them. They've had accidents caused by humans hitting them. And the cool thing about the car is the technology works by taking 50 photographs a second, right? Or 50 pictures a second. So they can actually pinpoint like the fraction of the second where the human driver hits the car and say, okay, that was your fault. So last year they stated it's going to be out in 3 to 5 years. And it's not just Google, right? This is Volvo, Audi, Cadillac, Nissan, Toyota. All these other auto manufacturers have committed to some kind of autonomous driving. So I think this is one that I think is a good bet to bank on. And really, I think in the end, regulation is probably going to be the likely hurdle. So for me, the interesting questions is, what does it mean, that transport's now independent of humans? So global logistics, personal transport. You get this kind of like transport as a service model. I think Uber is going to become so much more valuable when the taxis are actually just robo-taxis and they understand where everyone wants a ride at any time because they have all the data about it. I talked about get around. Another idea, quick idea, what do people do in the cars when they're driving themselves? Like, I wonder if you can have like this dating thing where you're both driving along this highway and you're like, oh, you're in the car next to me, we can just chat and like, I don't know, what do people do in cars, right? I mean, people have to drive right now, but the paradigm is going to change. What does that mean? The second one is robots are going to get better, right? And so I've got a couple of pictures here. The first, telepresence robots. Right now, I think it's a bit of a fad. Like, people like to make jokes about a little robot, but I think it's kind of cool that TED is just on right now, and Edward Snowden gave a talk on TED on a telepresence robot. So that's pretty cool. But I think that this might change a little bit of the kind of paradigm around having to be at work, right? Well, if the only reason you have to be at work is sometimes to go around and chat to someone, like maybe you can just have a couple of telepresence robots that you can log into, drive it around and say, hey boss, I need to talk to you about this thing or whatever. Next, I think drones, you saw the Amazon video, they're a reality. The technology is already here for drones. This is more of a consumer adoption thing. And actually the thing holding it back is regulation. So I think you can bank on commercial drones being a reality in the next couple of years. And then finally, industrial robots are going to get better, stronger, faster, more flexible. This is an assembly line for a car right now, and yeah, okay, so those are really specially tuned. But people are making like robotic arms that you put on the table. You kind of, the first time you just grab it and move the arms around, and then after that, it just remembers what you did and does it again and again and again, right? So it's like, it's even getting past that programmable layer of industrial robots. So I think those are going to have big implications for warehousing and logistics and stuff. One of the different like side kind of things that's going to happen with all this automation is manual labor is going to become cheaper and cheaper or obsolete. And one big question on my mind is always like, when the robots are coming to take all our jobs and stuff, who is going to, what are we going to do with those people? Like, they're going to have to be retrained to be, back into the workforce. And I think there's you don't want to call it an opportunity, but there's a big thing there where there's going to be a huge amount of demand, I think, for retraining. Next is medicine. So I think this is also happening, digital medicine and kind of telemedicine, right? The ability to, that picture in the top left is StethoCloud. It's a former housemate of mine, actually. He's actually in Silicon Valley raising some funds, but he's developed an add-on to the mobile phone that can replicate a stethoscope, right? So anyone in the world can buy this, put it in their phone, listen to heart sounds or breath sounds, and then send them over the internet to a doctor who can diagnose. Or maybe it doesn't even have to be a doctor, you can diagnose it digitally through AI or something. But you're going to see more and more of these kind of add-ons to technology, and essentially what all these things do is they put a digital layer between doctor and patient, and that digital layer can help get over the tyranny of distance, right? The fact that a doctor has to be in the same room as a patient. It's not true anymore. Then there's this Proteus digital pill. So that's a pill, that's a chip on a pill. And if you take it, the chip gets powered by your gut acid. And essentially it allows you to digitally tell when pills have been taken. It also allows you to digitally monitor what's going on in your stomach. So essentially there's going to be a lot of data around your health. Then pretty cool, this is Da Vinci surgical robot. Essentially, if you're a surgeon and you make like a 1-inch mistake with your arm, you could cut the guy's trachea and then it's all over or something, right? But the Da Vinci robot, the guy on the left, he's actually controlling the robot. Every motion he makes is 10 times smaller on the robot. So if he kind of makes an inch mistake, it's actually only a couple of millimeters on the patient, and so it's kind of leading to safer patient outcomes with all this kind of stuff. So all about putting a digital layer between patient and doctor. So the tyranny of distance is going to fall down with medicine. Next topic, Internet of Things. I think this is happening already. As I said, one of the MAP startups is kind of in the same field of essentially it's connected devices, right? Every device that you think of that has some kind of electrical component, or even if it doesn't have an electrical component, will eventually be digitized and connected to everything else. And so you're going to have cheap sensors everywhere, right? Sensors are getting cheaper and cheaper. Miniaturization is happening, at an exponential rate. Essentially, soon there's going to be reams of data everywhere. The interesting problem here is data is useless without understanding. So there's going to be huge opportunities in contextualizing data and putting it together in a meaningful way for consumers. So you've got LifeXBulb, which is a Melbourne kind of startup doing digital light bulbs. The Nest thermostat, which was just bought by Google for I think 16 billion. Was it 16 billion? Maybe not. And then this picture is pretty cool. She's wearing 19 fitness trackers, 19 different fitness trackers. But what I talked about just then about quantified self and digital medicine, like that's going to play away in fitness trackers so soon that all your body's kind of biometric data is probably going to be assessed if you want it to be, and that can lead to better health outcomes. Next, this is a pretty real trend as well. 3D printing. So the interesting thing about 3D printing is it's not really a technological problem. The tech for 3D printing was invented like decades ago, but it was under patent, which means it's expensive until patents start expiring in the last kind of 5 years. And that's why it's getting more press, because now the printers are getting cheaper and cheaper. And 3D printing opens up opportunities because you can do things with 3D printing that you can't do with like cast, mold, mass manufacturing. You can make interesting shapes like that kind of shape there. You can't make that with cast iron molding, right? And why do you want to make interesting shapes? Well, you can replicate, for example, the complex shapes of a bird's bone, and it essentially puts space between the bones, but the kind of structures are right that it's actually really strong while being super light. So jets are actually implementing this kind of technology. They're 3D printing jet parts to make the planes lighter, but still quite structurally strong. You can 3D print bespoke shapes. There's a company that 3D prints prosthetics, for example, for people that have lost limbs. And the difference between having a prosthetic that's generic and a prosthetic that's made just for you that looks exactly like your other leg is actually really important for people's lives. Just to put it in there, last year, or I think it might have been 2 years ago now, somebody put a design for a gun on the torrent sites and stuff like that. So 3D printing weaponry is also a concern, but all this stuff is happening. In terms of opportunities, what does this mean? I think that essentially you're moving from a paradigm where you pay for atoms to you're moving to a paradigm where you're paying for bits. In terms of information, the design is actually more important than the stuff itself because you can just print it out. So that's going to put the industry in this interesting position that the content industry has been facing for a long time now, which is how do you get a maker paid when you can just press Control-C and Control-V on the work? So I think there's an opportunity for who is the first person that's able to create a system that creates light locks on content. So, kind of like iTunes or kind of like Steam has for video games, where you could pirate it and you could just copy it for free, but because it's relatively cheap and it's kind of slightly locked, so it's not that easy to pirate it, you might as well just buy it. And that kind of marketplace, I think, is going to be quite valuable for the kind of 3D printing design markets. I can't go through this without talking about Bitcoin, but I'm not going to go deeply into it. If you want to know more about Bitcoin, I actually suggest you talk to Scott Lee, who's another MAP fellow. But essentially, Bitcoin is very interesting because it solves a technological, there's a technological innovation here, which is the ability to put programs directly on top of the money that the program's meant to do with. And the most direct application I can think of here is derivatives contracts, where instead of having a bet like, I'll pay you $100 if this stock price goes above this level at this time, and you have to trust the exchange to go and monitor that, you can just put that order right on the money itself, right? The money itself is smart enough to realize, okay, I'm only going to hand myself over to the one counterparty or the other if I see some stuff happening in the code, right? At the moment, I think the smart play with Bitcoin is to build the shovels, maybe not to invest in Bitcoin itself, but just build the shovels and the infrastructure that a Bitcoin-powered economy is going to need. Next, there's a couple of innovations that are, I'll be a bit briefer here, but these innovations I think are a bit more far off, but they're very interesting nonetheless. So biotech, the ability to sequence DNA is falling faster than Moore's law. So at the top there, that straight line is Moore's law, and then that's kind of what it's been doing for the last like 5 years. Now you can sequence a genome for I think $1,000, and soon you'll be able to do it I think for like you know, $5 or something like that. And what this means is you're going to be able to start hacking biology. You're going to be able to take things from, so that's a glowing plant, for example. If you take the glowing genes from a jellyfish and put them into, or a firefly, and you put them into the plant, you can actually create a plant that glows at night. So what do you need street lighting for if you can grow, you know, glowing plants? That's very interesting. They were funded, I think, $1 million or something in Kickstarter, really, really fast. The reason that I say it's kind of a bit far off is right now it's still quite hard to get into biotech if you're not trained in biotech. If you're not a trained biologist, it's hard to kind of get into that field. But I think that presents an opportunity, right? That's like a shovel's opportunity. Like, why aren't all of us just like, it's easy to get into code, right? You go on Codecademy, you can start getting into programming. Why isn't it so easy to get into biotech? Are there opportunities to kind of get people into biotech easier? For example, that thing in the middle is called Genome Compiler. It's a program that allows you to kind of see as a programming language the CAGTs that makes up DNA. Another kind of innovation in medicine is eventually with this genomic sequencing and stuff, you're going to get personalized medicine. So I did a 23andMe extract. This is some of my personal health information. But I've sequenced my genome and I can tell that I'm like susceptible to gout, atrial fibrillation, and age-related macular degeneration. So I should look after my eyes, I should look after my heart, and I should not drink too much alcohol or I'm going to get painful toes. I also know it's on another page, but I'm like sensitive to warfarin, right? So if I was to get a warfarin dose, I should actually have half of what they suggest. So I think medicine is going to get more personalized, where they're not going to just study 100 people and say, okay, well, this 100 people is the rest of the population. So they responded well to this drug, so you should respond well. I think it's going to be personalized medicine for you based on your genome, based on all the data from your quantified self, so it's based on your environment data and stuff as well. And then also, you know, there's a lot of innovations in stem cells, and the really cool thing about this is it could lead to, and people find this a bit freaky, but in vitro meat, so the ability to grow meat outside of an animal. And this is really important because right now, if you want to kind of eat meat, you wait for sun to hit grass, and grass grows, and then you feed the grass to a cow, and the cow turns that energy into, you know, muscle and bone and a nervous system and all this kind of stuff, and it uses the energy to walk around and all this kind of stuff. And then in the end, all you want is the meat, right? You don't want the bones, you don't want the nervous system or anything like that. So you're kind of speccing too high, right? You're wasting resources. And, you know, if you really just wanted meat, you should just grow meat. So that's really interesting. A quick thought on energy. So the future of energy, I think, is in the near term is going to be dominated by this technological innovation in fracking. Now, it's a very controversial issue, but the reality is it's happening. And so, you know, right now gas is really, really cheap. And that's probably going to dominate, you know, the energy industry for the next couple of years. But eventually, solar panel costs and solar costs and efficiency and stuff, the technology is getting better exponentially, right? So you look at this curve of like cents per kilowatt hour for solar, and it's doing this exponential curve down. So that's going to happen. I think that we're going to have a world of distributed energy with really good storage. So, you know, Tesla is now rolling out electric cars. The battery in that car is really quite big and quite efficient, and you can use that to kind of maybe absorb the peak and troughs at night. So if everyone's got an electric car, you can use them as a distributed storage network. So the real interesting thing in energy is like, what does the world look like in this distributed energy paradigm, instead of this paradigm where you have a whole bunch of power plants that are servicing everyone. You have everyone generating their own electricity plus minus a bit, and you just kind of trade little bits on the end. So that's probably the paradigm with energy. And then finally, you know, the coolest out there thing is, of course, space, right? So SpaceX, you know, is doing private launch. Planetary resources I already talked about, mining kind of asteroids. Mining asteroids sounds kind of funny, but essentially, like, if you know, just look at the numbers, asteroids are really huge. And essentially, like, mining one asteroid is essentially like more iron or nickel or whatever precious metal than the entire Earth has in its crust, or at least the stuff that we can access. So mining an asteroid, I think the first company to mine an asteroid becomes $1 trillion company. On the right there is this cool little thing called Arju Lab, which I think is interesting. It's the ability to, you can hire that and you can put your own program or experiment in a cube, and then they'll launch that cube satellite. So right now you can launch little things, microsatellites up, and they're fairly cheap, like $1,000 or something like that. So I think you're going to see more satellites around the Earth, and, you know, eventually you could get this paradigm where you have like near real-time views of the surface of the Earth, right? It's like Google Maps, but it updates every hour because you've just got so many geosynchronous satellites out there. I think that's going to be interesting. Like, does that mean that I can monitor bushfires really easily? Does that mean that I can, as a farmer, like know if my crop is like turning a bit yellow in the center there because I'm not giving enough iron or whatever nutrient? I think, you know, that's very interesting as well. So I've just blasted through a lot of tech trends, but I want to kind of close on some thoughts, which is essentially that I hope all of you are now really, really excited about the future. I'm like super excited about the future. I hope that all of you think really big about the ideas and the things that you can do, because even though, you know, you don't have to take the back seat. You're not inventing the technology, you don't have to. There are still huge opportunities for people that think about these tech trends and try and build things around them. That's all. Thank you.
I'd like to mention that the MAP Info Night is coming up on the 25th of March at Sydney My Asia Theatre at 6:30. So make sure you grab a flyer on the way out. That's it. Thanks for coming, guys.